Hey, I'm Cedric Chambers, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of the 3D Podcast, a masterclass where we share with you everything you need to know about how to transform diversity and inclusion in your organization as well as in your community. We're on a mission to amplify the voices of leaders that are making an impact in the world today so that we can have a better tomorrow. Our goal every episode is to keep it simple, honest, and transparent with you by uncovering the truths in diversity and inclusion with the hope of creating behavioral change, all while presenting it from a unique perspective. So look, if you're ready, get your notepad out, pour you a drink, and let's dive deep as we discuss the dimensions of diversity. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the 3D Podcast. Look, I'm excited for our discussion today. Why? Because I know we have an amazing topic, but also because I know our guest will do only what he knows how to do, which is keep it real. And if you're from where I'm from, we say keep it 100. So look, to provide a little insights on our guest, today we are speaking to and have the pleasure of connecting with Cornell Verdeja-Woodson. Cornell is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Headspace and the founder and CEO of a boutique consulting firm, Brave Trainings. Cornell has worked in the D&I space for 10 years, starting out in higher education and then transitioning into tech. Cornell lives in the Bay Area with his husband and their two dogs, London and Rome. So without further ado, Cornell, welcome to the show.
Hello, what's going on? I'm excited to be here.
Oh man, how are you doing today?
I'm good. The sun is shining. Today is actually my dog's Rome's birthday, so we're gonna have a little fun today. It's gonna be good. Good.
We're getting them some doggy cakes, some doggy bones.
Like, no yelling at him. He can sit on the couch if he wants today. We all good.
He get free range today.
Exactly.
Look, I'm excited for the discussion. Look, we have a great topic here. And, look, to start things off, look, I gave a little bit of a background, but I know that, look, I didn't do it justice. And so just to kick things off, can you just provide, overview of who you are, kind of your journey as you've progressed through your career, and then ultimately how you've gotten into the DE&I space?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, just thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be on this podcast, this episode today. I'd be remiss if I didn't say and share that, my journey started in Camden, New Jersey, right? I'm a kid, oldest of 5 kids, son of a single mother who did her thing to make sure that we had what we needed. And so I have to give honor to the space that I came from that made me, and also the woman that raised me and gave me the foundation that I needed to sit here with you today as a quote unquote expert of DEI, right?
You better say that.
Right, exactly. Went to Ithaca College, majored in communications, then would teach for America right after college in Atlanta, Georgia. Taught 9th through 12th grade English. So my babies, my kids, my children, they're still my kids, no matter what, no matter how old they get. But I would argue that my journey into DEI really began in my high school years, going to what we call a friend school. I got a 4-year scholarship for high school to go to this private Quaker school. And they really talk a lot about diversity and identity and things of that sort. And that really began the journey. But what really catapulted it was working with my kids in Atlanta and working with other teachers to talk about how we create spaces of belonging for people with different learning styles, and also considering our children's situation and how that impacts them, trauma, hurt and pain, and how that comes into the classroom, how they don't leave that behind them. Left the teachings. I just realized that wasn't where I needed to be. Went and got a master's in higher education from the University of Vermont, and thought that higher ed was where I was going to really lay roots and really create that space for underrepresented populations, particularly Black and Brown students. And then just really didn't work out in higher ed, just didn't feel like I could make the impact that I wanted to make, and made this transition into tech. Recognizing that tech is not perfect by no means. However, they are putting a lot more resources and energy behind moving the needle around DEI. And I'll also be honest, as a Black person who grew up in a low income background, it was also about building generational wealth and having access to what tech can provide for folks, and being able to pass that down to my children or my godchildren and things of that sort. But never thought I'd see myself in the DEI space. I would never have thought, I'm going to be a DEI professional. Really fell into it based on the series of events that the universe brought my way.
Got it. Vermont. Let's start there.
Yeah.
How do we get to
Everyone does when I say Vermont. Let's talk about that.
Look, how do we get to Vermont?
Let me tell you, my mentor, who's still a mentor of mine, she was the former president of my alma mater, Ithaca College. Her name is
Okay.
Maggie Williams, and she is just a strong advocate and has always been a strong advocate for diversity, but particularly racial
Mm.
diversity and belonging and inclusion. And so she always had this knack for lifting up professionals of color when I was a student and students of
Yep.
color. And she was my role model. She went
Hmm.
to University of Vermont to get her
Got
master's in
it.
higher ed. So I followed my role model. It was a really hard, trying experience, but it taught
Yep.
me a lot and gave me a lot of the foundation that I have today that I built my career on. Being in Vermont, at the time, I don't know if it still is, it was the second whitest state next to Maine. And so as a black person, being in that space, it was rough. I think
Yeah.
my second week in the city of Burlington, this white woman who was dating a black residential hall director on campus. She was
Mm.
down in the center of Burlington, and these three skinhead white men circled her and called her a nigger lover and ran
Oh
off.
man.
So I was like, oh, so that's how we doing this in
Yeah.
Burlington. That was
Yeah.
in what, 2013, I believe, 2011 maybe. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, so that's how we doing this. And so it just reminded you that even in liberal spaces, right, that there is ugly everywhere. It just really taught me that you can't slip. You can't let them catch you slipping either, because they'll
Hmm.
make you think that because it's liberal, you're safe. And that
Yeah.
wasn't the case.
To live in the world we live in today and to still see those things happen is still, I would say you really can't get used to it, even though you kind of, got to get past it and move forward. But to just hear it and to see it, and I've been in those spaces, right? I've lived in Wisconsin, I've lived in Ohio. Actually, we lived in Boston for 3 years, so we weren't
Oof.
far from Vermont. And in those spaces, you look around and you're just like, it's still it's
Yeah.
still change. And I'm from Georgia, and I'm like, look, and I would
Uh-huh.
say it's two different types, right? Because in Georgia,
Yes.
you know what's what, right? You look, I
Yes.
know where not to go, I know what to do, I know where to say, who to say it to, I know when the flag is flying. Look, I'm finna
Exactly.
take a left.
Uh-huh.
I'm
Uh-huh.
about to stay in the house today. And so, these things as you learn, and then you go to another state in different areas where you may think that it's different, like you said, liberal. You may think ideas are probably more progressive, and you're like, I
Right.
don't know. I don't know what we think
Because they
about
do a
progressive.
great job at hiding it, right? And
Yeah.
so it makes it almost more insidious
Yeah.
because your guard is down because you think you're safe, and then they
Yeah.
hit you by surprise with some of their ignorance. And yeah, it's
This
it's
is
it was
true.
rough. It was rough.
So you went to Vermont, you graduated, and then where did you go next?
I went to New York City. Got my
Okay.
first job at NYU in the Center for Multicultural Affairs.
Okay. Got
um,
it.
and worked there for about 2 years, and then went back to upstate New York and worked at Cornell University as the associate
Okay.
director for diversity and inclusion for the School of Industrial and Labor Relations.
Mm,
And then that's when I really started getting the itch of like, higher ed's not for me. This is
mm,
not the industry that I'm going to really make the impact, and really started pivoting myself and making decisions that would help me pivot into tech. So I moved
yeah.
out of student affairs and then went into the HR side of the university and was the diversity lead for the university. So doing
Hmm.
training and diversity programming, working with senior leaders around goals and things that sort. And then probably a year and a half, it took me to go through the hiring process, and finally got a job, my first job in tech out in Santa Cruz, California, actually. So moved
Got
across
it.
the country.
So curious there. So working in higher ed, and we're understanding that, especially in tech, where the talent is coming from, right? The places where they're coming from is very important. And so as you was in higher ed, was there anything what specifically were you seeing? Was you experiencing like certain things? Like what was it that said to you like, yeah, this isn't the space for me?
I think that higher ed moves at a snail's pace, right? And any higher
Ah,
ed
okay.
professional will tell
Yeah.
you that, right? It
Yeah.
takes 10 years to see something come to fruition, because you
Yeah.
got to build a committee for the committee on the project, right? And then
Yeah.
before the project gets greenlit, it needs to go through faculty senate, staff senate,
Mm,
student senate, the president, the alumni. Like, it needs to go all through all these chains of commands, and it's like, what are we doing, right?
yeah.
Like come on, like this is a lot of red tape, and it just takes forever to get anything
Yeah.
done. And ultimately, the commitment to DEI always feels inauthentic. That we learn to say the right things,
Yeah.
but then when it comes time to put action to those things, they don't get done, or they, like I said, take 10 years to see them come to anything. Higher
Hmm.
ed still operates very much in a traditional way in which
Yeah.
faculty run everything, particularly at an Ivy League institution, right? If faculty
Yep.
aren't with it, it's dead in the water.
Yeah.
And that ends up hurting the most marginalized people within those campuses. Black and brown people, trans people, queer people, women, things of that sort. And that was just something I just could not continue to deal with. Again, like I said, tech ain't no better. Like, it's not great, but
Yeah.
I can spin up a program and try something out and fail fast and keep moving,
Yep.
right? And
Yeah.
not have to go through 10 different, levels of bureaucracy in order to get something done.
Mm-hmm. Now that makes sense. You hear that a lot. Like you said, it's slow, and in a lot of cases, right? What you find is that, especially when you get into tenureship and that
Oh
piece, and
my
who's
goodness.
been there and the ideas they're still holding on to. They wrote the book for the book, and so you're still teaching out of something that was 45 years ago, and you're like, the
Absolutely.
world has changed, right? So no, I completely get that. And so, and this is interesting. We kind of lead us into our topic is that today we want to talk about bias, right? We want to understand it. We want to understand, when it's showing up, in organizations. It's huge, right? We understand that there's an element that, we all have some type of bias. We all have biases and things of that nature. But the question then becomes is, how do we recognize it? How do we then go in and address the bias in the context and the situation and the environments that we're in? And so when we think about this, to kind of set the groundwork and understand kind of what we can build off of, just kind of share like what is bias when we're thinking about it kind of in this context.
Yeah, I think in like the quick and dirty way, it's the shortcuts that our brain takes to make decisions, right? When
I
you
like
think
that.
back to prehistoric times, we didn't have time to make a decision about whether that pterodactyl was a friendly one and whether it was going to come down here to eat me or play cards, right? Like I had to haul ass, I had to run, I had to move, right? I had time to
Yeah.
stop and assess the situation. What
Mm-hmm.
happened though, as we evolved, we didn't recognize that I no longer have to make snap, quick judgments like that anymore, right? That I
Mm-hmm.
actually can, in some cases, take my time to really investigate and make sure that my gut feeling, my gut reaction is actually real or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, in a longer form, it is the simplified or narrow understanding of other people or other groups based on common cultural stereotypes. So I
Okay.
saw that movie, I saw that film, or I see these images, or my mama said, my daddy said years
Yeah.
ago. I ain't never met a black person in my life, but now I meet one and I think of all the stories
Yeah.
that those people told me about what it means to be black, and that's what comes up, right? Because
Yeah.
that's all I've ever been told, right? And then it becomes even more difficult to, I'm gonna say the word, erase those narrow images of
Mm-hmm.
groups, right? And see groups for not in this monolithic way, but in the very complex way in which particularly black people show up in this world, right? And not to mention
Mm-hmm.
every other identity. So very simplified, narrow views of a person or group of people based on common cultural stereotypes.
Got it. Got it. As people are listening to this, look up, and if you see a pterodactyl, you better haul.
Right.
You
You better,
better,
you
you
ain't got
better
time, right?
haul.
You don't know.
Look,
You got a
it
basket,
sticks.
all right, then maybe come to play cards, right?
No. Look, I love that example where you just got to go. And so understanding this framework, understanding the definition that you provided, when we think about this in the corporate setting, right, in corporate sense, like as leaders, what are the signs or those common themes that show themselves to make that leader realize that, hey, I'm seeing this bias and that it may be a problem within the organization? Like when they're going through and they're looking, they're analyzing, they're getting those kind of feelings. Like what are those themes that kind of show up to make you think, there might be something I need to address here?
It's a great question. One of the things that I do with organizations when I am running what we call a DEI audit is
Yep.
I'm asking about themes within their feedback. What kind of feedback are you giving women? What kind of
Mm-hmm.
feedback are you giving people of color, right? So we usually do focus groups to understand from those particular perspectives, what kind of feedback have you been getting? And then we do a control group, which are usually white men. What kind of feedback are you getting? And are there
Yeah.
drastic differences in the type and the language that is used when we provide feedback? I'm
Yeah.
looking at the makeup of the teams, right? That if you keep hiring the same people and we see similarities between the same people that you keep hiring, there's some bias happening there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's also who's getting promoted, right? So it's a whole chain of effect, right? It's a whole
Yep.
we call it a domino effect. Who are
Mm-hmm.
we hiring? Who are we promoting? What kind of feedback are we providing? Who's getting paid what? So a pay study also shows there's some bias, right? Because what you're saying is that her contribution to this team isn't the same as, or worth or value the same as his. That's bias right there. So those are some common ways that when I start seeing those things, I'm sort of going, okay,
Yeah.
there's some work we got to do here because
Mm-hmm.
these things would not be happening if bias wasn't a factor.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so as a leader, I'm now, seeing these situations pop up. I'm understanding that, hey, there is something here that I need to address, or I need to figure out a way to move forward. So when it comes to seeing these signs, how do you start to solve for mitigating the bias in the organization? Like, what's that path and that journey that you take to start to address it?
One is to own the fact that it happens, right? There are so many
Mm.
people in denial that this is even a real thing.
Oh,
So that's
yep.
and that's only a piece of it, Cedric, right? That's one piece of it. Then you got people who recognize that it's real, but it ain't me though.
Oh,
Right? That's them over there.
I know
They
them.
are the problem, not me. I'm one of the good people, right? Like I got
Yep.
5 Black friends, and I got three of my siblings are sisters, right? Like I'm good,
Yep.
And so it's also recognizing that you too, even though well intentioned, also have bias. Even
Yep.
though you come from marginalized identities, you also have bias that perpetuates
Mm-hmm.
against other people and sometimes against your own people. Right. So I
Yeah.
think that's like the, what we call in our community the coming to Jesus moment, right? That people have to come to recognize that, yeah, like I'm a good person. I was raised one, I mean one, I do good in the world, but I also do things that sort of pick up on my unconscious bias that I've been socialized to believe my entire life. So it's starting there. Then it's learning about the experiences of women, trans people, people of color, Asian people, Latinx people, people with disabilities, learning that information, and then it's doing something with it, right?
Yeah.
So how are you questioning what we do and how we do it and why we do it? Why is it that the last 4 senior level hires were all men? Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where did that come from? And then if I'm the one hiring, how am I looking at my hiring pattern and my notes that I'm writing about each candidate? And am I assessing it and checking in with other people to go, am I missing something? Right? Tell me, right? And really having that checks and balances that allows for us to make sure that bias isn't impacting us and our decisions that we make every single day the way it always has. But it takes intentionality. It takes owning it, and it takes really being mindful about it every single step of the way to mitigate its impact.
Got it. Got it. So let me ask you this. So coming into an organization, right? You're started, you're seeing yourself that, hey, these things are happening. And then now, you have to put that foot forward and either have the discussion with the leader or go down this path. Can you provide, an example or a situation to where, hey, you've encountered it and kind of how you handled it as you move forward, specifically with leaders, right? Because I know it starts from the top
Mhm.
down and understanding and getting everybody on the same page. And so when it comes to addressing it at the leadership level, to say, hey, this is what you're seeing, and this is the path that you need to go down. One, do you have an example of what you've seen before? Then two, like, how did you handle or how did you have those discussions with the leadership team?
Yeah. One prime example of it is I had a leadership team that we were talking about the use of their company PTO, paid
Okay.
time off. And this particular company has unlimited PTO. So you can really just like, as long as you're telling your supervisor, you're good, right?
Yeah.
What we found was that their Black and brown and female employees were not using it. They
Yeah.
were not
Took
taking
less.
time off.
Yep.
And so the senior
Yep.
leadership team was like, well, but like we have unlimited. Like, why aren't they just doing it? And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, let's talk about the experience of being a Black and brown person and a woman in a corporate environment. So let's
Mm-hmm.
lay out those experiences. When I'm not in the room where it's happening, not to quote Hamilton, right? But when I'm not in the room where it happens, that's missing out on promotion. That's
Yep.
missing out on being a part of the work, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
visibility that brings to individuals. And also, what does it say about what do my colleagues think of me when I take that time off?
Yeah.
Which is why now you're seeing a lot of companies make Fridays an off day for everybody.
Yep.
So now it's not that, oh, the Black people or the women are taking time off. No, everybody's getting time away, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's just sharing that narrative, sharing that perspective that none of those people in that room know, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, particularly in that group, they were all men, right? They don't and all white men. They don't understand that. So providing that narrative, providing that real life context, made them go, whoa, okay, all right, right? And they weren't ready to go to the next, Women's March and Black Lives Matter round, right? But like they
Yeah.
understood that moment, and that was a door into the conversation. So for
Yeah.
me, it's really about breaking it down and answering the why. What are
Got
the
it. Got it.
barriers that are in place right now?
Yeah, we've seen very similar situations when we rolled out unlimited vacation as well. And it's like when people have 3, 4, 5 weeks, however, they know like, okay, I'm about to plan out my year. This is when I'm taking my time. And as soon as unlimited PTO rolled out, you saw that decrease in time taken. It was like, it's almost like people felt bad, right? To
Yeah.
actually go take that time, right? They're like, well, I don't know, right? And so when you had that discussion and you kind of got to that realization to help those leaders understand what was the reception like?
I think there was a sense of, shock and awe,
Okay.
right? Like, wait,
It's just
what?
like, why not? Why?
Like,
Like, I would be
wow.
happy.
Right. They're like, no, we didn't know that was like, yeah, I know you didn't know because
Yeah.
that's not your lived experiences, right?
Yep.
But prior to me sharing that information, they were just like, I don't get it. That was my own aha moment. I
Mm-hmm.
remember, I always throw myself under the bus because I'm not perfect either. I was in grad school and I had always navigated the world through my Black and gay lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And back then being broke, right? And so those are my recently and I didn't. I'm broke, I'm Black, and I'm gay, right?
Oh.
And I was in a cohort getting my master's. So it's like 15 of us for 2 years. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a talkative person. I'm a big extrovert. So you
Yep.
give me a chance to speak, I'm going to speak. And one day, one of my classmates, actually one of my really good friends in the cohort, comes up to me and says, your male privilege takes up a lot of space. And I was like, male privilege? What you mean male privilege? I ain't got no damn male privilege. Speak. My hand isn't up against your mouth, preventing you from speaking. And she just sitting there like, you don't get it. And she had to break it down to me and say, like, one, just from an introvert extrovert standpoint, you always filling up all the silence. I haven't gotten a chance to think about what I want to say yet. But by the time you get up in there and take up all the space, then you go from a gender perspective, men have been socialized to take up space, to advocate for themselves, to use their voice. Women, not all women, but a lot of women haven't been taught to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they question whether or not what they have to say is even of value to this conversation. But when you go and take up all the space, you create less time and opportunity for those introverts or women to be able to get in there. So I've had to deal with that myself and be, sort of met with my own bias.
No, I for one, thanks for sharing the story, right? I think that, looking at that and then, even thinking about some of the leadership decisions that we make, it's that we have to have those different perspectives in the room, right? To understand what's about to happen. It's almost like using the if and then method, right? So if I do this, then what will happen? And really kind of asking ourselves those questions as we go through this, because everybody don't see the situation the way that we see it. And what we think is great might be something to where, others might say, I might be getting set up for the okie doke or something. Like I feel like something's about to happen. And so you try to navigate through that space, which ultimately for the receiver, for let's just say the entire employee population, that now gives them one extra thing to think about, to where they don't want to take the vacation. Burnout can happen, right? They're not doing, taking that self-care aspect. All these other aspects come up to where they've focused less and less on just the work that has to get done and have to, the things that are happening within the organization. And so let me ask you this. So taking this PTO, and so when you rolled it out, what was like the reception with the broader organization? Did you see, those various different feelings around it? Like, were you listening to people, what they were saying? Did they feel kind of the same way?
Yeah, so this was an organization that had already had it rolled out before I got there, right? So I was kind of coming in and kind of assessing what has happened since you rolled it out, right? And so through my own listening sessions and really getting to know, the employees at large, you start hearing these different experiences with paid time off, right? And burnout and why people aren't taking time away. But because I was asking those questions, we got that narrative. Most of us are not going to complain, because even complaining about it means, can send we're fearful of the message that sends, right? That you become the troublemaker,
the problem child,
you become the complainer,
there
right?
You go. Yeah.
So I hear about it. So it's almost, if I don't ask about it, then I never learn about it. So it's me, and that's usually why companies hire heads of DEI or chief diversity officers, because they want us, hopefully, to unearth the things that they're not thinking about, because we think about them because it's our job to. So I came in after that was already done, and really just had to kind of shed light on and look at what are our current processes and systems and culture that's in place, and how is it impacting different people who exist at this company, particularly if you're looking to hire more Black people, more Latinx people, more women, etc. We got to get this place ready and understand that before we welcome them into this space, or in tandem, right?
Yeah. That makes sense. So let me ask you, so when it comes to, you recognize it and now you're going out and you're approaching and you're addressing the situation, what happens or how do you approach it when you get the resistance? We get to the place that, hey, we won't own it. We won't recognize that it's real. And so it's almost like a non-starter we can't even get, to the next step. So how do we approach it when that happens as DE&I leaders?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, the biggest
Yeah.
thing that I tend to do is really think about who are my allies in this space, and who are
Oh,
my
I like it.
allies with positional power, right?
Mm,
At the director level, the VP
yeah.
level, and within the C-suite. Who does get it, and how can I really get with them to help use their positional power to influence their colleagues
Yeah.
into getting it? And then also, I must admit, I also work from the bottom up too. How am I getting the employees to understand what's happening and what's not moving forward and why we're not moving forward?
Yeah.
Because what we're seeing is that when the power of the employees start going, hey, what's going on? Now
Yeah.
everybody's like, oh crap, okay, we don't want to revolt, but we got to do something.
Yep.
So I must admit, and I'm pretty sure some of my other colleagues do this too, we started going, yeah, we can't get that done because we don't have X, Y, and Z, or we're not ready to do this. And when they hear it collectively, all of a sudden they start doing some of their work for you to help push it
Yeah.
up so we can actually move forward and start getting it done. I think the other thing I do too is also present research, benchmarks.
There you go.
What
Yeah.
are other companies doing? What does the research tell us that how we benefit from this if we make this decision to step into this body of work? And also really depends on the leader. Some leaders are very data driven. They want to see the data, right? So I know I got to approach them with that. Some leaders are very much connected to the heart. Storytelling is really impactful for them. They want to hear the story. So I might put on a panel of employees and talk about their experiences in this particular body of work that I'm trying to get done. And when they hear that, they go, okay, I get it. Right. So it's really just understanding my leaders really well and understanding what makes them tick, what do they respond to, and
Yeah.
using that to actually get what needs to get done.
We're one way in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we leave, the community that we go back to, what we're
Close vision.
doing, it's a whole different situation. So, like, are you doing anything to help extend those learnings, right? Whether it's because there's an aspect to where, in kind of my mind and kind of how I look at biases, it's a behavioral thing, right? We have to make the shift. And the only way really to make that shift, the way that I look at it is we have to create these new habits, right? That's going to replace the way that we thought, the way that we act, the way that we do certain things, right? To make sure that either the habit could be I might need to stop for a second, think about what I'm about to say before I say it, or I might need to go, like you said, talk to some allies, talk to some people who I think can give me some different perspectives. But there's different habits that have to take hold here. But those habits are tough to create when you spend 8 hours, at work doing something, and then the other, don't hurt me on my math here. 16
Right,
hours, I
right,
got it.
right,
I
right.
got
Yep.
it. The other 16 hours, you go back to the place that you were at. And so is there anything that you do as far as like helping, employees, helping leaders from a self-education perspective? Because there has to be an ownership here to where it's not just happening at work. It has to happen in the way that you interact with everyone, right? Because you may come to work and you're saying, hey, I'm fixing this, I'm working on this. But then when you go home, you got Jim, you got Teresa, everybody else who, is like, man, shut that, come on now.
Right.
So
No, absolutely.
how do you help employees or leaders?
It's so real. I mean, I do it by saying just that, right? Like this can't just be a workplace behavior. Like this is
Yeah.
something we need to be doing no matter where we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're at the grocery store, whether you're
Yep.
at the gym, whether you're in the airport, right? Traveling. How are we witnessing and acknowledging, looking at, not looking for, but just open to seeing that, wow, bias happens everywhere around us. And I have an opportunity to be an ally no matter where I am. Any training that I do, any fireside chat, any podcast episode that I do, particularly when I'm working with leaders and providing examples and contextualizing it, I'm giving examples of how it looks in the real world,
Yeah.
right? How not just the workplace, but in the real world as well. And I'm providing strategies that work in the workplace, but also in the real world as well. And so giving them those examples makes it so much bigger than just the workplace, right? I think is really, really critical, but also providing, and I hate that this is still a conversation that we have to have, but it's also what is that business case, right? What is the societal business case, in my opinion, right? Because those people out there that you run into are potential employees. They are potential business partners. They're potential, whatever it may be. They are human beings that in some way we all impact from a societal level that ultimately impacts the business, right?
Yeah.
And so for some leaders who need to understand and make the connection to the business, let me give it to you, right? I'm tired of having that conversation, but like, if that's where you are, let's start from there. But it's just helping them make the connection through real world contextual experiences and not just the theoretical. That I think I think humanizes the content.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so, look, I'm loving the discussion here. And so, look, as we get closer and closer to wrapping, if you could help sum up the discussion and kind of, get to this place here, is that what do you think are the biggest hurdles that others face in D&I roles? And if you could give them 2 to 3 actions that after listening to this podcast, after viewing this, they can start to really go in and work on in their organization to get them down the right path, what 2 or 3 actions can they take immediately after this to kind of move that needle forward in their organization?
I've been toying with this question a lot personally, even before this. I wonder how much of what gets changed is actually up to the DEI professional, right? Because I can come in and do the assessment, I can do the DEI audit, I can tell you everything that you hired me to tell you. I can bring in the experts, I can bring in the research. At the end of the day, what I'm seeing and what I think my colleagues are also seeing, it don't mean nothing unless people are actually ready to decenter themselves from the work and really do what's right for the masses, right? And so I really struggle with the idea of like, what can DEI professionals be doing to actually, so for example, one of the main issues is lack of resources. How many DEI professionals are a team of one, or what was a team of one for probably the first 2 or 3 years in their role, right? And had to really push and fight for headcount in order to get the work done. That's, to me, because that leads to burnout so fast. So fast. I think the other thing is also in regards to who we report to. DEI is still sitting in human resources. In my opinion, DEI is not a people.
You better say that.
Right? It's not a people operations, people service, right? It is a business imperative. Therefore, it should be its own function within a company reporting directly to the CEO. But we're still in HR because they only see us as people. So when I come in and go, hey, content, hey, product, hey, right, all these, marketing, they look at me like,
diversity.
why are you coming over here? What you doing, right? You over there in HR. It's like, nah, I'm everywhere because y'all all need to be thinking about it. So I think we really have to have an honest conversation. And this is not anything against HR, right? But it has to be removed out of it because it waters it down. And so those 2 big things, I don't, outside of advocating for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
What else can we actually be doing? It takes so we have to continue pushing, providing the understanding around why this needs to change. But at the end of the day, to really get it done, these leaders in these companies have to recognize the importance of it and give it the resources that it needs. That is just as important as your product development. I'll say it. It's just as important as your product development, right? And that it needs to be its own thing sitting at the C-suite in order for it to have the impact that it needs to have.
Man, if I had a DJ Clue bomb, I'd drop it right now.
That should have been your first question. That one was like
that's a whole other podcast.
I am passionate about that one.
No, look, I love it too. And let's real quick, I know it's going to sum it up, but look, that is so important when it comes to resource. First of all, where the money lies, right? Everything else is going to reside. It's going to go. Look, where the money reside. Look,
exactly.
So as we look at this, it becomes, and this is something that we got to understand, is that if the organization is really walking the walk in this situation, then it doesn't even have to be forever. But for a period of time, you have to have that chief diversity officer, whoever's leading that function, report directly to either the CEO or someone who we know when the decisions come down, they have the ear of the person at that level. They know that when it comes from this leader, hey, this is what we need to do because it's already been discussed. You ain't got to go back and scream to the CEO about anything. You don't have to say, why me? Why my organization? We're diverse, blah, 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 all this stuff. Is coming from the place directly from the source. And then also, as you mentioned, The way that we market, who we market to needs to get a look at. The way money is handled, who we're supporting, supply diversity needs to get looked at.
Yes.
When we think about technology and who's building the technology, right? We think about the facial recognition and who faces are we using? Have we thought about all these different perspectives when it comes to diversity? That's not necessarily, hey, this is a, engagement, fun, food and fellowship type of situation that goes up under, HR or something to where it's specifically about people. Because like I said, technology is where we're going and where we're at. And so how we look at that technology and who's being accounted for in the way that it's being built is important, right? And that's huge for true inclusion across the board, right? To make sure that everything that we do as an organization is equitable.
You hit on something. That word accountability will be my third issue. There's no accountability. That one's big. Dr. Gassam, she's on LinkedIn and writes a lot in Forbes, and just recently wrote an article on accountability. And I'm like, you're speak. I love her, first of all. So if she's listening,
shout out to Dr. Gassam. I know I got the pink elephant book over there. I know exactly who you're talking about.
But she talks about accountability, and it's absolutely right. We set these goals around DEI. But then when they're not met year over year, nothing happens, right? But let a salesperson not meet their goals year over year. What's going to happen to them? They out.
Be out.
After the first year of not meeting your sales goal, I'm putting you on a PDP. You're going to have a conversation. What's going on? After the second year, you're done, right? Why is it that you continue to keep elevating, but you haven't met your DEI goals, but they're so important to the company, but we're not holding people accountable. They're not a part of our performance evaluations. They're not tied to our bonuses and our salary and things of that sort. Nothing. So what you're telling us is that you don't actually care. You're performative because you're not doing the clear things that really show we mean business. When I was a teacher, one of the first things they told us is that if you are inconsistent with how you hold your students accountable for the rules that you set out in your classroom, they will know right away you don't really mean that.
Yep.
You don't mean that. And it's the same thing with grown people in the corporate world. It's the same thing.
Yep. And this is, oh man, whole other podcast. When it comes to accountability, if you don't have leaders holding others accountable, then at the end of the day, you can't expect the broader organization to hold each other accountable. Exactly. Because in their minds, it's like, well, why am I going to do your job if I know that if I hold them accountable and it comes to you, you're just going to let them off the hook anyway. Exactly. So why should I go in and be that person? Right? Exactly. I'm going to create I'm going to mess up my je ne sais quoi, or whatever the case is, because I'm trying to figure out, how to do your job. And so that is a huge piece around accountability, right? And it also comes to this aspect of when we're creating change, when we're mitigating bias, all of this, the question is this: are we really trying to change behaviors or are we trying to make people more comfortable?
Right.
And that is something that we got to get clear, is that everything that we're going to be doing moving forward, if this is the path we're going to go down, it's going to get uncomfortable, right? It's going to be some situations
that we're trying not to disrupt certain people's comfort. And that's not even say certain people, white people's comfort, right? We center white people in DEI, white men in particular, but also white women. I got to hold white women accountable as well, right? We center white people in every DEI thing we do. And the minute they're uncomfortable, everything's over. The minute I've set you off, it's like, oh, no, I don't like this. The program's gone. The money's gone. We stopped the initiative because the white people were upset. And so and they've always been comfortable, and we don't want to disrupt that. And that is a big part of the problem. Until we are okay with people being uncomfortable, white people being uncomfortable, we're not going to make the change that we actually want to make.
So just to sum that up, look, one, we need resources. We need the ability to be able to have the people, the funds to do this work. Two, we need to make sure that the reporting structure is set up so that success can happen. When technology is important to the organization, it reports to the CEO. When money is important, CFO, it reports to the CEO. So make sure that that's lined up and go start to have conversations about that. And then the third piece is accountability, right? We have to be able to hold accountable from the top down, because if leaders aren't holding themselves accountable, if we're not doing it at that level, then we can't expect anyone else to go in and hold each other accountable at the end of the day, right? I would say that when it comes to job titles, whether it's finance, whether it's HR, whether it's marketing, it should be /. DE&I, because we
Yeah,
all at some point have to be able to account for each other in this process. And when we see it in those small 3, 4, 5 people meetings, we
yeah,
have to say something, we have to address it, and we have to make sure that we're doing our part, right, to move this
absolutely.
forward. So to kind of cap it off, and I love to end this off, right, is that I'm big on leadership statements. I'm big on, how we leave situations. And so, I would like to know, and I typically say this in 25 words or less, what your leadership statement is. And this is something to where I always say this, right? Whether I meet someone 10 times or whether I meet someone, just one time, I want them to say the same thing about me. And what that means is that, especially when we're thinking about bias, it means that every interaction that I have has to be intentional, right? I
Yeah,
have to be active in the situation, the relationship. I have to be intentional about how I'm coming off, what I'm saying. I have to make sure that I'm leaving this situation the way that I want to leave it. And so when
yeah.
it comes to your leadership legacy, what will other people say about you when you leave that environment, when you leave these organizations, however it may be? What would they say about you, or what would you want them to say about you?
I think the biggest thing I always want people to say about me is that when they engaged with me, whether one-on-one or in a group, that they always felt that I authentically listened and heard them. That
Mm,
in a world where people oftentimes feel silenced and disregarded and unheard, that there was
yep.
one person in that moment that made them feel like their voice mattered and what they were experiencing was real.
Yeah.
So I want people to know, I want people to leave going, wow, Cornell made me feel validated. He made me feel heard. No, did he fix my problem necessarily? Right? No, because it's so much bigger than just this individual. But I felt
Yep.
like somebody had my back and someone was authentic with me. That's what I want people to say about me.
Awesome. There it goes. There it goes. Well, look, this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, do you have any shout outs, any parting words? Where can people find you if they want to connect with you, pick your
Yeah,
brain, understand kind of a little bit more?
absolutely. If you want to connect with me, LinkedIn is always a good place. You can also visit my website at www.bravetrainings.com. I'm on Instagram at It's Me Cornell. I know, real creative. But those are the places where I am most of the time. So feel free to connect with me there. I mean, just a big, again, another shout out to Dr. Gassam, who I
Mm,
just love and adore. Her mind is just, she teaches me so much. So I really
yep.
adore her. And really shout out to all my DEI professionals out there who are doing their part to change the world. And really, my hope for all of us is that we're taking time for ourselves and that we're setting up boundaries to realize that this work will always be here and that we are just as important as this work and that we got to take care of ourselves. So shout out to all my fellow professionals who are really on the front lines doing the work.
Awesome. 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 Well, look, that does it for us. Thanks for joining, everyone. Another episode of 3D Podcast. This has been Cedric, and you've been listening to Cornell Verdeja-Woodson, Director, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Headspace. Look, we out.